investigation into the events of November 28th and 29th, 1981, begins not with the discovery of the individual in the water, but with the specific operational parameters of the vessel involved. The central location for the inquiry was the Splendor, a 60-foot motor yacht registered to Robert Wagner. According to maritime records, the vessel was moored at Isthmus Cove off Santa Catalina Island, a location roughly 22 miles from the Los Angeles coastline. To understand the trajectory of the investigation, one must first analyze the physical and social architecture of the environment in which the four individuals were contained. The manifest for the Thanksgiving weekend excursion listed 4 persons: the actress Natalie Wood, her husband Robert Wagner, the actor Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern. The dynamic aboard the vessel is a critical component of the case file, reconstructed later through witness statements and sworn depositions. At the time, Wood and Walken were in the midst of production on a film titled Brainstorm. Production logs indicate that filming had been rigorous, and the weekend trip was intended as a break in the schedule. However, investigators noted later that professional tension appeared to bleed into the personal sphere. The doctrine of evidence requires a close examination of the timeline leading up to the critical hours. The party departed Marina del Rey on Friday, November 27th. Meteorological reports for that Friday indicate a rough crossing. The sea state in the San Pedro Channel was turbulent, causing significant discomfort to the passengers. Logs show that the crossing took longer than anticipated due to the swells. This detail is relevant as it establishes the physical fatigue of the individuals involved before the principal events of Saturday occurred. Upon arrival at Catalina, the Splendor was not initially moored at the isthmus, but anchored in deeper water, which contributed to a restless night due to the rolling of the vessel. By the morning of Saturday, November 28th, the Splendor was moved to a mooring closer to shore, identified in harbor records as mooring number N2. This position is significant for acoustic analysis. The mooring was located approximately 100 yards from the shoreline and was surrounded by other leisure craft. The proximity of potential witnesses would later become a focal point for investigators attempting to corroborate the timeline of sounds emanating from the Wagner vessel. The consumption of alcohol is a primary factor documented throughout the investigative files. Toxicology reports, which will be detailed in the autopsy analysis, originated from the consumption patterns established on Saturday afternoon. According to statements provided by Captain Davern, the party began consuming wine and champagne in the late morning. This continued throughout the day. At approximately 4 in the afternoon, the timeline places the party Wood, Wagner, and Wacken ashore at the isthmus. They utilized the Splendor's dinghy, a 10-foot inflatable Zodiac named the Prince Valiant. The technical specifications of this dinghy are crucial to the procedural narrative. It was equipped with an outboard motor that, according to later testimony, had distinct mechanical idiosyncrasies. It required a specific sequence to start, and the engine noise was recognizable to those familiar with it. The group spent several hours at the only establishment available in that specific cove, Doug's Harbor Reef. Receipts and witness testimony from the restaurant staff provide a clear record of their activities. The server assigned to their table later testified to investigators that the group consumed multiple bottles of champagne and cocktails. The behavior of the party was described as loud and visibly intoxicated. The manager of the establishment was sufficiently concerned about their condition that he contacted the Harbor Patrol. Logs from the Harbor Patrol confirm a notification was made regarding the group's potential inability to operate their dinghy safely. Though no direct intervention occurred at that specific hour, the timeline places their departure from the restaurant between 10 and 10:30 at night. The atmospheric conditions had deteriorated. Weather logs for the area recorded temperatures dropping into the low 50s, with the sky overcast and the visibility poor. The wind had picked up, creating choppy water within the harbor. The journey back to the Splendor in the small Zodiac was reportedly erratic. Upon boarding the main vessel, the procedural focus shifts to the confined space of the yacht salon. The layout of the Splendor is relevant to the evidence. The salon, or main living area, was separated from the master stateroom by a short companionway. The acoustics of the vessel meant that raised voices in the salon could be audible from the aft deck, but potentially muffled to nearby boats, depending on the wind direction. According to the initial statements provided to law enforcement, a disagreement ensued in the main salon shortly after the group boarded. The nature of this dispute, reconstructed through the inconsistent accounts of the 3 surviving men, centered on professional jealousy and the career trajectory of Wood. Captain Davern's initial report to police stated that the argument was primarily between Wagner and Wacken, concerning the philosophical implications of an actor's dedication to their craft, which Wagner felt threatened his domestic life. Procedurally, the escalation of this conflict is marked by the sound of breaking glass. Investigators found physical evidence of a broken wine bottle in the salon during the subsequent inspection of the vessel. This aligns with statements suggesting that Wagner smashed a bottle against a table in frustration. The time of this incident is estimated to be shortly after 11 at night. Following the shattering of the bottle, the timeline indicates that Wood left the salon to retreat to the master stateroom. This is a critical juncture in the sequence of events. From this moment forward, there is no verified visual confirmation of Wood by any of the surviving witnesses. The narrative relies entirely on the auditory timeline and the subsequent lack of activity. Captain Davern stated that he began closing up the bridge and cleaning the aft deck area. Wagner and Walken reportedly remained in the salon for a period, though the intensity of their conversation diminished. Sometime between 11:30 at night and midnight, Wagner went to the master stateroom. According to his statement to investigators, the individual was not in the room. However, forensic analysis of the timeline requires integrating the statements of independent witnesses located on nearby vessels. Approximately 80 feet away from the Splendor, a woman named Marilyn Wayne was on board a sailboat named the Capricorn. In a statement provided to the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, Wayne reported hearing voices coming from the direction of the Splendor around 11:05 at night. She described hearing an argument, followed by a woman's voice crying out for help. Wayne's statement details that the calls for assistance continued for approximately 15 minutes. She noted that she heard a male voice respond, stating that someone was coming. Wayne claimed that due to the loud party atmosphere often present in the harbor, she and her partner did not immediately contact authorities, assuming it was a domestic dispute that was being resolved. The discrepancy between the time of these cries, 11:05, and the time the Splendor's occupants reported realizing Wood was missing, midnight, creates a procedural conflict that the investigation struggled to reconcile. If the cries heard by the Capricorn witnesses were indeed those of the missing individual, it implies she was in the water while the occupants of the Splendor were still arguably in the salon or on the bridge. The procedural failure to immediately secure the scene begins at this timestamp. Upon discovering his wife's absence, Wagner returned to the salon and informed the others. At this stage, the assumption made by the occupants of the vessel was not one of immediate danger. The working theory, as related to law enforcement later, was that Wood had taken the dinghy to return to shore, perhaps to spend the night away from the conflict. This assumption was based on the observation that the Prince Valiant was no longer tied to the stern of the Splendor. The investigation later focused heavily on this deduction. Wood was known, according to friends and family interviews, to have a deep-seated fear of dark water. The plausibility of her attempting to navigate a 10-foot inflatable boat alone at midnight in choppy waters became a central point of contention in the analysis of the evidence. Despite the absence of the individual and the dinghy, no distress call was issued via the marine radio at that hour. The logbooks of the Harbor Patrol and the Coast Guard show no incoming communications from the Splendor between midnight and 1:30 in the morning. Instead, the occupants of the boat reportedly waited, assuming a return or a call from shore. The timeline of the search efforts is marked by a significant delay. It was not until 1:30 in the morning on Sunday, November 29th, that a ship-to-shore call was made. However, this call was not directed to the Coast Guard. Records indicate the call was placed to a private party on the mainland, requesting them to check if Wood had returned to her home via ferry or other means. The official notification to the Coast Guard did not occur until 3:30 in the morning, more than 4 hours after Wood was last seen entering the stateroom. This delay created a massive gap in the investigative timeline, allowing tides and currents to shift any potential evidence in the water. By the time the search was formally initiated, the environmental conditions had changed, and the radius of the search area had expanded exponentially due to the drift. Search and rescue operations commenced in the pre-dawn hours of November 29th. The search involved sheriff's patrol boats and Coast Guard helicopters scanning the surface of the ocean. The environmental conditions had worsened, with swells complicating visual identification of objects in the water. At 7:44 in the morning, a sheriff's department helicopter located the Prince Valiant dinghy. It was found drifting inside a cave at Blue Cavern Point, approximately 1 mile away from the Splendor's anchorage. The recovery of the dinghy provided essential forensic details. Investigators noted that the ignition key was in the switch, but turned to the off position. The gear lever was in neutral, and the oars were locked in place. This configuration suggested that the engine had never been started. The vessel showed no signs of impact or collision. Approximately 1 hour later, at 8:30 in the morning, the search team located the individual in the water. The discovery was made roughly 1 mile away from the dinghy. The individual was identified as Natalie Wood. She was found floating face down. The state of the clothing, a flannel nightgown, heavy wool socks, and a red down jacket, would become pivotal evidence regarding her buoyancy and the sequence of events that led her from the safety of the stateroom into the dark water of the Pacific. The examination of the individual at the scene and the subsequent autopsy provided the primary biological evidence for the case. The down jacket became a focal point of the analysis. Experts determined that when waterlogged, the jacket would have weighed between 30 and 40 pounds, significantly inhibiting the ability to swim or stay afloat. The investigation fell under the jurisdiction of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. The chief medical examiner, Dr. Thomas Noguchi, oversaw the post-mortem examination. The autopsy report indicated that the cause of the fatal incident was drowning and hypothermia. toxicology screening revealed a blood alcohol content of 0.14%, which is above the legal limit for operating a vehicle. In addition to the alcohol, the report noted traces of 2 prescription medications, a painkiller and a motion sickness pill, which could have potentiated the effects of the alcohol. According to the medical examiner's notes, this level of intoxication would have significantly impaired motor skills and judgment. Physical examination of the individual revealed several marks that became subject to intense scrutiny. The autopsy report listed a superficial abrasion on the left cheek and several bruises on the arms and legs, while the initial 1981 investigation concluded these markings were consistent with an accidental fall against the dinghy or the yacht while attempting to board. Later reviews of the file would challenge this conclusion. The central procedural question regarding the incident involves the mechanics of the dinghy. The Prince Valiant was tied to the stern of the Splendor. To board it, one would have to step from the swim step of the yacht. The lines securing the dinghy were tied to cleats on the yacht. When the dinghy was found, the lines were trailing in the water, suggesting it had been untied rather than breaking loose. 2 main theories were constructed based on this physical evidence. The first theory, accepted during the initial investigation, posited that the individual attempted to leave the yacht to escape the argument. She untied the dinghy, slipped on the swim step, and fell into the water. The heavy jacket would have pulled her down, and the dinghy would have drifted away in the wind. The second theory suggested she was attempting to secure a banging dinghy that was keeping her awake. In this scenario, she leaned over to adjust the line, lost her balance, and fell. However, investigators noted discrepancies in both theories when aligned with the timeline. If the dinghy had drifted away, the wind direction that night would have pushed it toward the open sea, not into the cove where it was found. Furthermore, a review of weather reports from the night in question complicated the accidental slip theory. Meteorological records indicate that the sea state in the cove was relatively calm, and the wind was not sufficient to cause the dinghy to bang violently against the hull. The context of the case is therefore defined by a convergence of failures. The failure to maintain a safe environment aboard the vessel, the failure to immediately verify the location of the passenger after a dispute, the failure to utilize marine radio protocols immediately upon noticing the disappearance, and the failure of nearby witnesses to interpret distress signals accurately. Despite the discrepancies between the witness account of cries for help and the delayed reporting of the disappearance, the investigation was closed 2 weeks later. The death was ruled an accident. The file remained dormant for 3 decades. In November of 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department announced the reopening of the investigation. This decision was prompted by new information provided by the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern. In updated statements to homicide detectives, Davern admitted that he had withheld information during the 1981 inquiry. He alleged that he had been instructed to adhere to a specific narrative to avoid scrutiny. According to the revised timeline presented by Davern, the argument between Wagner and Wood was more physical than previously disclosed. Davern stated that following the smashing of the bottle, the argument moved to the rear deck of the vessel. He claimed to have heard the sounds of a physical altercation. When he later went to the deck, Wagner was present, but Wood was not. Davern asserted that Wagner delayed contacting the Coast Guard and discouraged him from turning on the boat's searchlights to scan the water. Records indicate that a private search firm was contacted before the official distress call was placed to authorities. With the reopening of the case, the coroner's office reevaluated the original autopsy findings. In 2012, the chief medical examiner amended the death certificate. The cause was changed from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. The supplemental report cited the bruising found on the arms and legs as potential evidence of a non-accidental event. The new analysis suggested that the bruising occurred prior to the individual entering the water, rather than during a struggle to climb out. The location and pattern of the bruises were deemed consistent with someone being held or sustaining injury during an altercation. Investigators also revisited the forensic evidence concerning the dinghy. The fact that the ignition was off and the gear was in neutral undermined the theory that the individual had taken the boat to leave the area. If the intent was to flee, procedural logic suggests the engine would have been engaged. If the intent was merely to tie a loose line, as the original theory posited, the presence of the down jacket was questioned, as one might not don heavy outerwear for a task expected to take seconds. The failure to preserve the vessel in 1981 meant that 30 years later, forensic technology could not be applied to determine if the individual had ever actually touched the dinghy that night, or if another person had untied it. In 2018, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially named Robert Wagner a person of interest in the investigation. Detectives cited the changing accounts of the events on the deck and the inconsistencies in the timeline as the primary reasons for this designation. Specifically, investigators focused on the gap between the alleged time of disappearance, around 10:45, and the distress call at 1:30. Despite the reclassification of the death certificate and the designation of a person of interest, no charges were filed. The investigation faced the significant hurdle of degraded physical evidence and the passage of time. The yacht itself had been sold and refitted multiple times. eliminating any possibility of forensic analysis of the deck or stateroom. The original samples taken during the autopsy were no longer available for modern DNA testing or advanced analysis. The investigation remains open. The tangible records consist of conflicting witness statements, a toxicology report confirming intoxication, a timeline with an unaccounted 2-hour gap, and a medical report documenting unexplained bruising. The shift from accidental drowning to undetermined factors represents a procedural acknowledgement that the physical evidence does not fully support the initial narrative of a simple fall. The case rests on the unresolved discrepancy between the silence of the records regarding the hours of midnight to 1:30 and the physical reality of the individual found 1 mile away from safety. Without new physical evidence or a confession, the doctrine of evidence in this matter leads to an inconclusive end. The file remains open, awaiting any further actionable information.